Hi friends, welcome back to Nobody Knows Podcast, dedicated to the ones who are still trying to figure it all out in life. I hope everyone is doing well. If this is your first time listening, hello and thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Juliana and I am a 29-year-old who has consistently felt lost in life and like I've always been behind as I navigated my 20s. I created Nobody Knows to share my experiences and advice in hopes that we can relate to one another and also to normalize we're all just doing our best to find our way. We also have guests on here like we do today to spice things up with a different perspective, knowledge, and expertise of figuring it all out. If you have been loving this podcast, make sure you're following on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Lastly, I would love your feedback for Nobody Knows Podcast, and the best way to show your support is either through a 5-star review on either listening platform or by writing to me directly on either Instagram at Nobody Knows Podcast and on TikTok at Nobody Knows Podcast followed by an underscore. Anyone who has a job, cares about their career, and or has had or is going through a career identity crisis, you are in for a real treat today. We're chatting with Janel Abrahami, a multi-hyphenate career coach who's experienced her fair share of what am I doing moments in her career. Janel realized she was no longer invested in the career she had set out for herself. She realized she no longer wanted to be in her corporate gig, but had no idea what to do instead. It took Janel an entire year from initially realizing she was off track to finally get honest about what she wanted next, to finally think bigger and more creatively about her potential. She claims once she took back the keys to her career and rerouted, her journey felt more purposeful and fulfilling. Janel kicks off our episode by reflecting on her corporate career, where she embodied the girl boss mentality, much like Andie Anderson from How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. Love that movie. She hustled day in and day out, saying yes to everything in pursuit of success. However, this relentless drive led her to burnout. It was during this challenging period that, as previously mentioned, Janel realized she wasn't truly fulfilled by the corporate expectations set for her. She now aims to channel the likes of Oprah Winfrey, an icon of versatility and success, and who has discovered what truly matters to her in her career. Janel poses a lot of reflective questions in this episode that I think are beneficial for listeners to use as a pulse check, but are super powerful for those that are currently struggling right now in their careers. Questions like, are you genuinely satisfied with your current role? What do you really want? What brings you joy? What success metrics are you holding yourself and your career to? And so many more goodies like that. So keep listening as we're getting back into the driver's seat and redefining career success in a way that resonates with our true selves, one that feels comfortable, exciting, and real. Thanks so much, Janel, for joining me today on Nobody Knows Podcast. We connected through Roxy Cows, who was also on the Nobody Knows Podcast previously, and I'm so grateful that she tagged me in your content. She was like, Juliana, you need to look at what Janel's doing because it's really interesting. She has lots of tips, lots of really tangible advice on growing your career, being in like your late 20s, early 30s of like, I still don't know what I'm doing, but like I'm really ambitious. I love working, but I'm still figuring it all out. So I'm glad that we could connect today and I'm really excited for our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
So we always start Nobody Knows Podcast off with like the burning question, essentially what Nobody Knows is all about. It's what are you currently figuring out in life right now? So this could be big, small, it could be related to your work. It could also be personal. What is Janel figuring out?
What am I not figuring out? But I think the most top of mind kind of like question that I'm navigating is boundaries, and specifically with my work and rest. So I am developing what I call and what other people call a portfolio career, which means that I have a couple of different projects, a couple of different job titles and clients that make up a portfolio of jobs instead of just having one full-time job title. And that's extremely fulfilling for me and the way that I like to work and find new projects and express myself. But it also means that there's always something more that I can be doing. And I'm now navigating the like boundary piece. When is enough enough? When can I say no to something that I'm excited about, but for the sake of my health, my mental capacity, my relationships? That's definitely what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's so fair. As you mentioned, the portfolio career, and we'll get into that a little bit further in the episode, but you're working essentially for yourself. And like, there's a lot of jobs. It doesn't necessarily have to be like you're freelance, but like real estate, for example, or like owning your own business. Like, you always have to be working for yourself. And I think everyone in that realm struggles with boundaries because you never know when the next paycheck is coming in, or essentially you have to work for the next paycheck. So the blurred lines of, okay, I'm working and working and working, but you don't get the pay yet, and you keep hustling and grinding. It's really easy to get burnt out or just kind of fed up, and also not have other interests or like live your life. You can get too wrapped up in the work. So I can totally identify with that feeling of boundaries.
I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I did burn out following this career model. And so about a year ago, so I did go back to the corporate world after being an entrepreneur for a couple of years. And then that ran its course through a layoff. And so I found myself at the same kind of decision crossroads. Do I want to go corporate full-time path where the direct deposit is hitting even if I fail that day, like I'm still getting paid? Am I really more drawn and passionate about creating something for myself, even though it comes with those trade-offs? So I'm sure we can dive a little bit deeper into that later.
Totally. And I don't know if you're interested in sharing this, but you did hint at like when you were burnt out, it did lead to a layoff. Can you just highlight a little bit, again, if you're only comfortable with sharing this, of like you're in like the deep, dark depths of being burnt out? Because I have also experienced burnout, but then you get laid off. So it's kind of like kicking you while you're down, even more of a blow to your ego. What was that like?
It definitely felt like I was being kicked while I was down. You know, I went through a period right after where I was kind of bitter and I was really disappointed in my organization. I had actually just been so burnt out that at the beginning of this year, I took a medical leave of absence for my mental health to really kind of just like, I needed to reset. I needed to find a better like mental health therapist and kind of calibrate that way. And so I was really lucky. Well, actually, I want to take that back. I wasn't lucky. Everyone should have the option to do that, no matter where they're employed. And it should not be tied to your employment. I'll die on that hill. But I was grateful that I could take that time and that my entire team understood. And it was a very short period of time, too. It was only like 3 weeks. And so I came back from that. So consider it like a long vacation, even though it wasn't a vacation. I came back from that. And then 2 weeks later, my role was eliminated. My role was made redundant.
Oh my gosh.
And so it was really hard when you're in that mental space already to not interpret that as, oh, I'm being punished for taking time off for my mental health, which I know wasn't the case, but when you're in that place where everything still feels very like strong, pronounced, and it stings, it kind of just felt like the hole got even deeper that I was in. So I'm really, really happy to say that that's very far behind me now. Where I am now, just like 9 months later, is night and day. But it was a very hard period of time where I was like, okay, great. Now I have to like jump right back into the job search. I thought I was going to search immediately for another full-time tech HR job, which was my bread and butter. And the market sucks and blah, blah, blah. But spoiler alert, that ended up with me thinking, you know what? I think this is entrepreneurship chapter 2, and let's figure out a way to make it work for me this time instead of just following a model of entrepreneurship that everyone else is doing that I feel like is the only way.
We actually segued perfectly into my second question, because I want to know more about Janelle before like 9 months ago, like corporate girl Janelle. So tell us about how you started out in corporate and where you were before you started working for yourself, and also maybe highlight on like why you thought that was a good fit, or maybe why it was a good fit at the time.
Yeah, I was such a textbook 2010s ambitious girl boss girly. So I went to university in New York City, and at my school you start interning freshman year. It's just like, oh, obviously you're interning and going to class and living in the city and blah, blah, blah. It was truly like, oh, I am going to be that girl, like an Andie Anderson or whatever you want, like, truly slaying the girl boss world. And that is actually what happened. And I became a career coach kind of by accident while I was still in university and worked at our university career center for everyone. And we ended up doing that for my last 3 years in university. And then that parlayed itself into a full-time job in HR and career program management, et cetera, right after college. And so I was like, I am ahead of the curve. Watch out, world. My plan is going exactly as I laid it out and manifested it. Like, I had a huge ego back then too. And I was like, I got this. Like, people dream about this. No stopping me. And I definitely followed that predetermined path. I was in learning and development and people and culture. And so I set my sights on being like a chief HR officer or a chief people officer or learning officer. And I got my master's in management, HR, and organizations. It was like, wow, like truly look out, world. Like, I am on a roll, and maybe I'll be the youngest CHRO at whatever company. Yeah. And I followed that path for another 7 years. I worked in New York and in San Francisco. That was a really strategic move that I'm glad that I made. I switched industries and cities to almost triple my salary, which was fantastic. Wow. And in the corporate world, was good at my job, but because I was starting to get unfulfilled, I became not as good at my job that I could have been. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like the fulfillment piece just to me is a huge factor in my motivation and my performance. And so when I acknowledged and recognized the fact that like, oh, I'm actually not playing to the level that I could be playing. Why is that? It's because I was just really dissatisfied with the monotony and the red tape and bureaucracy of the corporate world. Even though I had done everything up until then to be such a skilled and savvy player in that game, I realized like, okay, just because I can do this doesn't mean I want to do it. So I had that really kind of fruitful corporate career until I got to the point around 2020 in like the very beginning of the pandemic. I was going through another layoff from an organization that was just kind of like panicked and cutting jobs left and right because of the pandemic. And I had a moment to think to myself, like, okay, is this actually the path that I want to keep going down? As I was scrolling through LinkedIn for those same job titles, I was like, hold on, before we deep into this, like, is this actually the path that I want to keep following? And when I said no to myself, that was even its own shattering glass moment, being like, what do you mean I don't want to follow that path anymore? Like, it was such an identity crisis that I was no longer bought into this perfectly laid plan that was perfectly laying itself out for me. And so I really felt like, am I really going to throw a grenade into this perfect little situation that I built for myself when nothing else is going wrong? And to say yes was like, all right, I guess I'm going to do it.
I've felt like that before, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have felt like that before, where that's the perfect way to explain it. It's like, don't fix it if it's not broke, right? Like, why would I ruin, quote unquote, my career or like jeopardize it when like, you know, things technically on paper are going so great. Yeah. And I think that also ties into like our parents' generation. You work the same job for like years on end because it works and you have a stable income and it fits within your family dynamic and just like everyone's routine, right? But like they also didn't acknowledge or prioritize joy or happiness out of our jobs. And I think that is like the key factor now of we are. And like, why are we going to waste our life working somewhere where sure, it looks great on paper and you've like tripled your salary, like you said, like you're making a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, are you happy?
Right. And I do think it's important for me to acknowledge that at that point, and then again at this point that I find myself in chapter 2, I am not married. I do not have children. I don't have to care for any elderly family members or in any other capacity. Like, for all intents and purposes, I am kind of like very free to make these decisions that really only impact myself. And that in and of itself is a privilege to be able to say like, yeah, sure, I will blow this up and see what happens. There's a lot of other people who have to take a lot more time and have a lot of difficult conversations with other people to make sure that that's the wise choice. So I don't just want to say that like it's a flippant, like, oh yeah, anyone can do this, because that's not true.
That's a really good point to call out. You mentioned on your website that pivoting your career from corporate HR to an independent career coach was the right choice. But you also highlighted, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, it was like really messy, maddening, and lonely. So can you tell us more about this whole journey?
Yes. So I also want to give more context to what the process actually looked like for anyone who's listening to this and thinking like, permission slip signed by Janelle and Juliana. I can go ahead and do this. Now, what does it actually look like? And yes, I hope you do take this as a permission slip. But what I did when I made the decision and I decided like, okay, this is something that I'm going to figure out. I am going to pursue what it means to work for myself and build my own thing. But that did not start the next day. I then had to say, all right, practically speaking, I live in San Francisco by myself. This is very expensive. And I'm willing to start from scratch, go from like my tech salary to nothing while I build this up. So I actually decided to find and accept a bridge job. And a bridge job is a job that meets most of your requirements for either like lifestyle, financial, social, or community. It's not exactly it's definitely not your forever job, but it is one step closer, or it's a stepping stone to get you a little bit closer to where you eventually want to be. So the reason that I found this bridge job after I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur is because I still wanted an income to maintain my lifestyle while I figured out what my business model would be, while I figured out how to find clients. I had never done that before. So in tandem, I started learning what it meant to be an independent coach. I started figuring out what my career coaching style would be based on my experience and my personal values and beliefs around the world of work and the future of work and ambition. And at the same time, I was on a job search looking for a role that met certain requirements. It was like a salary requirement. It was completely remote and let me stay in San Francisco. And it wasn't exactly a learning and development job, everything that I had done before, but it was like slightly different so that I was still mentally stimulated and not like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm in this job again.
Yeah.
I found that full-time corporate job that I stayed in for another year while I built my independent career coaching business up brick by brick on the side, mornings, nights, and moments in between. So what that looked like is after I'd kind of taken a couple of beta clients, I literally went on my Instagram story and I was like, well, I'm going to try this job, this career coaching thing now. Like, swipe up or DM me if you want to be one of my first clients for like a beta rate. And I got a great response and started coaching, honestly, friends. So folks who I already knew, no strangers, women that I went to college with, who were in my sorority, who were friends, who were willing to pay me this like very small rate. And that was so essential in one, building my confidence to keep doing it. Two, figuring out the modality of coaching that I really liked. Like, do I want to talk on the phone? Do I want to meet in person? Is it going to be Zoom? Is it going to be one-on-one? Is it going to be group? Is it just going to be asynchronous? What is it? So those low stakes experiments were huge in figuring out what kind of business might work for me. I will say, foreshadowing, spoiler alert, I chose a model that ended up not being right for me, but I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't tried. So over the course of the next year, while I was working full time and building this business, I created a course, a digital course that was the culmination of all of the one-on-one career coaching conversations I had been having with a lot of individual clients and everything that I knew about job searching, making a change, and landing a new job in this post-pandemic market. And that became my course that I still offer called Pivot with Purpose. Since Pivot with Purpose has launched, it's been responsible for hundreds of successful career pivots, finding career clarity, helping people start their own independent entrepreneurial ventures or land better jobs, get bridge jobs, go back to school, literally anything, but it starts with that clarity. So then I got to a point a year later where I was working this corporate job. Pivot with Purpose was gaining so much momentum that, again, I got to the inflection point, and a lot of people asked me, like, how do you know it was the right time to finally quit corporate? This is when I knew that both of those things started to suffer. I couldn't be my best at either of them because they were both asking for all of me. And so I never wanted to be at the point where I was a low performer, because like that's just like my ego thing, right? As being this like overachiever, ambitious woman, like I can't be in a job where like I'm not performing well, but I also can't perform well if I want to continue this thing that I'm building. So I gave my notice and I started the next day. That was
Oh
in
my
2020.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. First off, that's incredible that you literally built your business while working like a full-time job. Like that is the reality. I feel like for a lot of people who start businesses or like start their passion projects, like let's be real.
Yeah.
Unless you are very well off or just have the luxury of having someone just pay for your bills while you build up your side business or your business, like you're
Yeah.
gonna have to work. But that in and of itself can be really demanding because there might be days where you're like, I literally just work like a 8, 9 hour day at my corporate or like my full-time job, and now I'm gonna go and do my side business, which sometimes you don't want to do it, but like you need to do it because that's the consistency part of you wouldn't have gotten to that point where then you had to make the decision about the two of them without that consistency and like really putting in those hours, like you said, like morning, night, in between when you had free time.
Exactly. So if someone's listening to this thinking like, what is the right path for me? I don't want to say that if you don't take your time and build while you have a 9 to 5, you're doing it wrong, because like wrong doesn't exist when it comes to creating a career and entrepreneurship and everything. But I would say it's important to be honest about your appetite for hustle. And that I feel like is a dirty word now. But if we wanted to break it down, like I didn't have a high appetite for hustle because we had just been through a globally traumatic event. I wanted to take my time. I wanted to make sure that like I wasn't like shining super bright and fast and then burning out as just as quickly. So I said,
Yeah.
I am going to take the slower, more time intensive path that gives me some cushion and some wiggle room. But another woman in my position could have easily said, you know what? I work best when there's a fire under my ass and like I have no choice but to make it work. So I'm just going to leap because I know myself and I know that that's how I'm going to do my best work. If that's you,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. And if you know that about yourself, even better, because that self-awareness is your biggest superpower as an entrepreneur or someone who wants to do their own thing, even when they have a 9 to 5. It's the knowing yourself and making the decisions that are aligned with you and not feeling guilty about that way. So I don't want anyone to listen and think like, but I really want to do it now. And I know that I could do it if I just,
Yeah.
gave myself 6 months. Like, great. If you know that about yourself, fantastic. But you just have to be cognizant of what that means for your next 6 months.
On your website too, you talk a little bit about something called a North Star career, but I also want to talk about a portfolio career. I feel like they could kind of be interchangeable because like a portfolio career is like you're doing multiple different income streams at the same time, and that could look like a North Star career. Yeah. So maybe if you could explain what both of these terms are, maybe how they're interchangeable, but like why you think it's important to find either of these in their professional journey.
That's a great question. And you're right in that they are not mutually exclusive. My North Star career happens to be a portfolio career model. So what I mean by North Star career, that to me means that I am following where I really just like come alive in that direction where I just feel like my internal compass is pointing due north, or as north as possible, because it doesn't feel like that every single day.
Yeah.
The reason that I wake up and like open my laptop or send that email or start that project is because like I just know in my bones, like this is what I'm meant to be doing. And this is what I love. And even if it takes a while, even if it's slow, even if I strike out time or time again, like I just have this knowing that this is for me and I'm really good at this, or I can get really good at it and enjoy it. That's what the North Star means to me. For a lot of my clients and a lot of women who have gone through Pivot with Purpose, that means a 9 to 5 at a company that aligns with their values, at a company that walks the walk when it comes to human rights, as much as a 9 to 5 company can, giving back, to supporting underrepresented communities. Like that's their North Star career. Or it means being in a specific role where their innate strengths are celebrated. For example, one of my clients who transitioned from being like a do everything type of woman at like a 3-person office that is truly her superpower, but she didn't feel recognized or appreciated there. So she went to a slightly larger company with better pay, better benefits, and more recognition for the super jack of all trades woman that she is, the super generalist. And that is her North Star, because it's just what she's amazing at and then what she gets fulfillment from being amazing at. So it looks different for everyone. And unfortunately, it's hard for me to really qualify it in words, because it really does come down to like a knowing, a feeling.
Yeah.
But a portfolio career is something that's starting to gain a little bit more traction. Yeah. And I thought that I came up with a term by myself. I definitely didn't, because then I realized there are some great folks who have already been talking about this for a while. One is Dave Nabinski, and he actually has a podcast called the Portfolio Career Podcast. Oh my God, and so once I found that, I was like, oh my gosh, he is speaking my language, and he does such an amazing job at like profiling a lot of people who are following this model of careers. And so I've kind of been using that word a little bit in our conversation, because I think we're very familiar with the term business model. What's your business model? Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Blah, blah, blah. But I think we're also approaching a time where we can start talking about career models, because there are different models of a career. And this portfolio model is one that just has so much opportunity for fulfillment, expansion, more income, but it does come with some trade-offs. So for transparency, what my portfolio career currently looks like, and this is subject to change at any moment.
Yeah.
If you look at like me at the center of like a photo, and then there's a bunch of different bubbles around me, around my head. These are what all the different bubbles would say. One would be career coach for ambitious millennial folks. Two would be career programming consultant for companies, universities, professional organizations. So I come in and consult on career development programming that they have for their members or their employees. Another bubble would be public speaker. So I'll come in and do keynotes or presentations and workshops on specific career skills that are helping people feel equipped and ready for the future of work and what that means. Another would be content creator. We are cranking out that content. Everything is content.
Yeah,
but
you are.
Now it got to the point, it was a very long time that I was creating content for no money, just for myself to market my business. But now that I've shifted my focus, now I'm to the point where, okay, actually creating certain pieces of content is an income stream. And another one that I would really want to manifest, another bubble around my portfolio career that is currently in progress, is my first book. So I don't know how that's going to be published. Maybe it'll be traditionally published, maybe I'll self-publish or hybrid, but that will be another stream of income. It won't be a lot of income, but it will be another stream of just like using my superpowers, my knowledge, my expertise in a way that helps other people.
I love that. Congratulations on the book. There was the soon-to-be book. That is so exciting. I also feel like a book is such a large feat, because my dad's used to be a sports journalist, and he also did a book when he was retired, and I know all of the work that goes into a book. Like, books are hard. They're no joke, and it goes back to the how much do you want to hustle, or like how hungry kind of are you for it. And I feel like the best way to determine if you are hungry for it is by doing a book, because it's like you and the pages, like you against the pages, or you working with the pages to get it done. And then there's the whole feat of like how you want to publish too. So that in and of itself is really kick-ass. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. That's so real. So real.
So tying back into Pivot with Purpose and some of the clients that you work with, what would you say is like the common factors that you see from potential clients or people that you work with? What are like the key attributes or like the core themes that you always see within the clients?
Yeah, I'm smiling because it just like comes so quickly, because I hear it so often. It almost like, how could this be possible that everyone is feeling this way? But the majority of the folks that come and find Pivot with Purpose and are really successful with the program and the course are women, or anyone really, an individual who has a couple of years of career experience under their belt, maybe stumbled into their current career path, chose it on a whim out of college, or it's just kind of where they ended up circumstantially. And then a few years later are picking up their head, looking around and being like, I don't want this anymore. This is just not right for me, but this is all I know how to do. If I don't do this, what else could I possibly do? And that's where Pivot with Purpose, like that's the problem that it really solves, is helping you figure out you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. You already have so much to offer that can be translated to a number of different career paths and jobs. Let's get clear on what that is so that you can decide which one you want and then land that type of role as efficiently as possible. So the thing that I hear the most is, how did I end up here? How I thought that I always wanted this, but I don't. So now what? Did I just waste all that time in this job if I don't want it anymore? And the answer to that is absolutely no. It is not a waste of time. Everything that you've done before was for a reason, and it makes you better positioned and a more attractive candidate for what you want to do next. So someone listening to this takes anything away from this conversation is that nothing you've done up until now has been a waste. You are starting from experience, and that is only an asset.
I can definitely identify with that because I have a few episodes that talk about this, but when I was going to university, like you said, it's kind of like on a whim. I don't think a lot of my friends from high school really knew what they wanted to do. Some of them had a really great idea, and that's awesome. And some of them are still in that field. A lot of us aren't, like majority of us aren't, but I think majority of us like literally had no idea what the hell we wanted to do in university. More so like we were just like, okay, this is the next step that we do. So like, where's the best culture or like party school, you know, like things like that. We weren't really making smart decisions based on like our future careers. And so I went to school just for like the most broadest program ever, like communications, which in the grand scheme of things was great because it was so broad. But I have felt after all of that time of going to school, like I still have no idea what I'm doing, or kind of like at the point where like, okay, well, what now? And like, is that kind of a waste of what I've done? Or like, I don't know how to change, or this is all I know. I've definitely said all of those things before.
I know. And it's especially apparent in the type of person, the type of like ambitious, overachieving, but underfulfilled millennial that I really speak with so much, because we put so much pressure on ourselves to have figured it out. And because we're like, oh, well, obviously I had everything I needed to be successful. So why don't I feel successful? Why don't I look successful to other people? So then what's wrong with me that I did not fulfill what I was, my end of the bargain? Because the world and the universe or whatever, like my parents, society gave me everything that I needed to be moving and grooving. So A, what's wrong with me that I don't want this, or what's wrong with me that this isn't working for me? But that's the wrong question to be asking.
And also it ties into that, like, you know how people classify each generation, and like millennials are so like ungrateful, right? Like that's what we've been pinned as, even though we do work hard. But you really like hit the nail on the head with, why are we feeling like we've literally feel like we've been given everything, but it's not clicking, like something's missing. So that's definitely fair.
That just made me think of when you said that millennials were so ungrateful, but then going off the conversation that we just had, I feel like it can be summarized as like millennial guilt. Like, okay, yes, now we are a little bit older. Now we're in our 30s. Some millennials are approaching 40 or in their 40s. And we realize, and we have the maturity and the hindsight to realize, like, we had everything that we needed. And that's not to say that we ever were ungrateful, but even if you were, now that we're at this point, I at least feel a lot of millennial guilt, thinking like, why aren't I further along given everything that I had? Why aren't I satisfied? And that is so ungrateful of me to be feeling that way. And so that I just feel worse about myself. So a really terrible cocktail to be day.
That's so fair. That's definitely fair. And that ties into my next question of, it's kind of like a loop. Like we feel ungrateful and we're already naturally driven and want to be successful. So we like keep pushing ourselves. We strive for that success and to have successful careers. But what is like the perfect blend of like, how do we continue to like hit those success goals or feel satisfied with ourselves, but also not burn ourselves out and not like literally run ourselves dry?
That's the core tenet of my newsletter and like kind of the little brand that I'm building. It's called Going Places, and it's specifically for the folks who grew up hearing things like, oh, you're going places. You have so much potential, so much to offer, such a promising young woman or a promising young man, only then to arrive at this age, let's say early 30s, mid 30s, whatever, to realize like, shouldn't I be places by now? Was this? Do I still have potential? Have I wasted my potential? Do I have capacity to go other places. And like that just was born from like a very dark thought that I was grappling with by myself. And then a conversation that I had with my good friend Marissa, where we really articulated those questions. It was like, hang on a second. I feel like we're all kind of thinking this because we're preparing for a future that just like doesn't exist anymore, especially our generation of women and men or non-binary folks who were told like, okay, this is the way, like follow the boomer way, but also you have so many more resources to make you even more successful. And we got those 30 under 30 lists and we had everything we needed, but things changed. And we got a guidebook for a reality that doesn't exist anymore. But we are still tying arbitrary success metrics to a goal that we are not able to hit. The goal isn't there anymore. We're still kicking towards it, shooting at it. And so no wonder we feel unsuccessful. So going back to like the reason that I decided to start this newsletter or rebrand this newsletter around going places is that your potential never expires. And you have the opportunity right now to move the goalpost to wherever you feel like it fits, to define success in a way that feels very, very real and comfortable and exciting for you. I know it's hard for a lot of ambitious, overachieving millennial folks, but like to start to give less of a fuck about what other people think about your definition of success. And so then once you arrive there, then it's also my mission to give you the tools, resources, insights, personal stories, hacks, links, whatever, to facilitate your journey on the way to success now that you've redefined it for yourself.
How do you move the focus on like external validation to more internal fulfillment in our professional lives? And I think you, again, said that perfectly with like, you kind of have to just like not take in other people's opinions and really focus on like what makes you and your core being happy and content and fulfilled.
Yes. Moving on from or starting to ignore external validation or placing your own personal validation in other places outside of external validation is very hard. And it is not a switch that you just turn on and off one day. It's a muscle that you practice flexing and building. And there are going to be times where you do fall into the trap of external validation. However, I had a really cool conversation with women's leadership coach, Bahija Humphrey, who kind of did a lot of deep dives into external validation and people pleasing. And her advice that I've really tried to take to heart is to just move in silence more. Like sometimes you don't need to tell people what your goals actually are or how you've redefined success. It's really no one else's business but yours. And that's very hard, at least for me to do. Like, I want to share. Honestly, I feel so much more value as I've gotten older and just like moving in silence. Lil Wayne once said, real G's move in silence, like lasagna. And you know what? He was onto something, if I do say so myself.
That's such a good analogy. That's hilarious.
Says a white woman from New Jersey, but still, you know what I mean? Like, it's real. Like, take it for what it is. Like, no one really needs to know. And I am just the type of person who gets excited by talking and sharing about my goals because I hope that it's a model for other people seeing me who's like, no one special, going after these huge goals, like publishing a freaking book. You know what I mean? I hope that me sharing that and like bring you along the process of like, I'm writing the proposal and I hope I find an agent and like, I hope it's a book deal, but if it's not, I'll figure out another way to get it into the world. That feels right for me to share because I hope that like other people are watching that thinking she can do it. I can do it. I would love for someone to watch what I'm up to and hear my goals and be like, I could do that. Knowing that it does take a lot of work, but you know, that's the reason.
Pivoting back to discussing your portfolio career. So in a TikTok you say, and I'm going to quote now, I'm not telling you to quit your job, but I am telling you that you can't rely on that job. And for many of us who are still stuck in the 9-to-5, we're working for just one company and typically making the big bucks for someone else. It is difficult to not rely just on that said job because it's all we have. And while at the same time, it is incredibly stressful, volatile, and unsatisfying to remain this way, as there's a slowing demand for full-time workers and a declining wage growth. So how would you recommend people to get started on looking for secondary passive income or exploring other ways to make an income when they're still in their 9-to-5?
That's such an amazing question. And I'll be transparent in that my opinions and strong thoughts on this are still in formulation. So like this is a space that I feel so curious and passionate about talking about, starting a conversation, bringing it to more people's awareness that the models of our career are changing and have the opportunity to change. And just with a caveat that like, I'm still forming these thoughts and articulations as we go. To your question around how to start, I would first encourage you to think about, how do you want to show up? Do you want to work in the gig economy, or do you want to work in the knowledge economy? So the gig economy, let's think about that as these side hustles or income streams like Airbnb-ing your second property or your apartment or whatnot, Rover, dog walking, Grubhub, Uber Eats, whatever, Uber, driving. That's the gig economy. The knowledge economy is using your expertise, your insights and authority in the space that you've been working your 9 to 5 all these years, and monetizing that for your own benefit, using your knowledge and trading that for income. So if you want to move into the knowledge economy space, which I strongly recommend someone who's been in a 9 to 5 for at least a little while and knows what the heck they're talking about, I have kind of formulated the 4 C's. The 4 C's are amazing ways to get started in adding one additional income stream to your portfolio career. And that would be coaching, one-on-one or group live coaching. That has a heavy caveat in that make sure that you're equipped to coach people and coach them in a space that you actually have the right to coach them in. So for an example, social media coaching for e-commerce brands. So if you come in and coach them, like, here's how to develop your on-camera presence, or here's how to refine your niche or audience or whatnot. But that also lends itself to the second C, which is consulting. So coming in on a consultative basis to another organization or a small business or another venture or a founder who's just getting started, consulting in an area of expertise that you have a proven track record of knowing your shit. The third is courses. So distilling that knowledge, that insight, authority, whatever it is, into a course that you make once, you sell on Evergreen, on a place like Kajabi or Teachable, and that just becomes a passive income stream. Passive is not really the right word because you still have to market it and let people know that it exists, and that is work. But you create the course once. It's something that you know like the back of your hand, your bread and butter. So for example, that could be finding real estate clients in Colorado or whatever, like something super niche, you know what I mean? Something that an audience would find valuable, but it's not, Instagram 101. And then the fourth C in monetizing your knowledge would be a paid community. So creating a community of other people in your space, in your niche, in your industry, like women in tech, millennials for climate change, whatever it is, starting some sort of low price point paid community where you moderate, you facilitate that community. Maybe you host virtual gatherings or monthly Q&A sessions, or just the opportunity for people in that community to connect with each other. But there's a $5 a month price tag on it. That's another way to monetize your niche, authority, or knowledge.
I love those. What advice would you give to those that are not fulfilled in their current role and are feeling the effects of burnout, but they're trying to get out of their job? They know they've identified that this job or this career is not meant for them, but they're in the deep, dark depths of burnout, and they can't even find the strength to really move the needle because they're just so burnt out. And let's say, for example, they don't have the ability to take leave of absence or take that time. There are a lot of hurdles, and I'm sure you experience this too, hurdles to just get there and have the time off. And a lot of things, especially when we're so young, of am I even deserving to take that time? There's just so many different aspects of getting to the point of, okay, I actually have 3 weeks, however much time off. So let's say someone doesn't have the ability to do that. How can they move the needle to figure out the next step of where they should be going?
The first thing that I would encourage this person to do is to start talking to someone about it, and to not put the burden on themselves to navigate it on their own. To navigate it alone in silence without anyone else knowing. First and foremost, if you do nothing else, just start talking about what you're feeling and experiencing to someone else. If you have the resources for that person to be a mental health therapist, even better. If not, a parent that you trust, a sibling, a significant other, a roommate, but just speak it out loud and get that validation and normalization from another human being. That does wonders in and of itself. The second thing would then to be gaining that clarity on why what you're currently doing is not working. So before you even start to jump into like, what do I want next? Let's first figure out what's not working about where you are now, because that insight is key to figuring out what will work or what might work next, what you want to try and look forward to. But if you go from, okay, this isn't working, let me just jump into the next thing and see if that works, more often than not, you will find yourself back at square one eventually, still not having addressed the root of that dissatisfaction. So figure out what's not working. Then that next step is, how do we take the self-awareness and the self-knowledge from what's not working, what you've done in the past that you have or have not liked, and what you're curious and passionate about in the future? How do we blend those three things into options for what to pursue next? And that is a kind of all laid out for you in Pivot with Purpose or working with me or some of my content.
Those are great. And I really like the specific part about you need to like stop and identify like what's not working, because you can so identify with like jumping into something new or just like rushing into all of those parts, and then you hit the same experience that you did beforehand or previously.
It's kind of like dating or relationships, you know, like if you have that friend that's never single and like has another significant other lined up before they break up with the next one,
totally,
chances are they haven't taken the time to figure out why didn't it work with the other folks, but they just need to feel like they're with someone or whatnot. But if you're the same type of like job hopping, just going on to the next thing because it pays better or it's a sexy company name title that has cachet or it lets you work remotely, whatever, that's great. But if you don't stop and actually figure out why has it not worked in the past, you're bound to run into those same problems under a different company name, a different sheen, whatever it is.
In our initial time together, we talked about how your career in your 20s looks a lot different, and we've already sort of highlighted that in this discussion in your 30s now. And I want to talk about your ambition in your 30s and those changes that you've seen as you've matured and gotten more experienced in your career. So how has your definition of success or your ambition changed from your 20s to now your 30s?
That's such a wonderful question. Because it makes me feel a lot of love for my younger self and a lot of love for my present self, which is valuable. So thank you for that question. The biggest difference between my 20s and my 30s is what I can see being possible for me. In my 20s, I really only saw one or two very formulaic or pre-constructed things as being possible for me. That's a chief HR officer, the head of learning and development. Maybe if we're getting really wild, a therapist. If I went back to school and got the master's and the PhD and blah, 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 like, whoa, but that's thinking really big. But now in my 30s, because I've realized that the 9 to 5 is not really reliable, that I've realized I have the skills and the savvy to create something from nothing, that I've realized that like I can parlay my deep expertise, something that I've been entrenched in for 13 years in a lot of different ways. And because the future of work is so rapidly evolving to create more opportunities for us, I now see that like I have so much more is possible for me than I ever thought to imagine in my 20s. And I think that's a really cool thing to sit and reflect on. Anyone listening to this, like I want you to reflect and find evidence that proves true that you have more possible for you now than you did 5 years ago. And I'm sure you will find evidence of that being true, because it's the exact thing that proves wrong your hypothesis that I've wasted my potential. And I've done everything that I could possibly do, and it's just downhill from here. Those were the dark thoughts that I was thinking at the beginning of this year. And now I have evidence that the opposite is actually true. So much more is possible for me, and so much more is possible for you than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, however long you want to think about it.
How important do you think the roles of self-discovery and introspection when redefining your career goals and ambitions, specifically as a woman, progress through the different stages of our lives?
I think I'm going to speak specifically to a generation because I do think that like we have different inputs and influences on the way we think about that based on when we grew up and all the societal factors that were going on. So if I'm speaking specifically for millennials, we really grew up in a time where like go to the best school, get the best education you can. And I'm really speaking for like privileged millennials, if I'm being honest. Go to the best school, get the best education, get an amazing paying job right out of college. It doesn't really matter if you love it. If you do, that's even better. Or get a job that you're so passionate about and so in love with, even if it pays you beans, because like that's the meaning of life, right? Like if you want to be a journalist, great, you're doing it for the passion of it. You know what I mean? Those are just like the dichotomy that we grew up seeing. Like it's either that or that, and I'm going to be good with my choice. But then the self-awareness piece comes in when you interact with and have experience with more inputs. The more you put yourself out there and interact with the world around you, you try different jobs, you speak with different people who become mentors to you, you keep in touch with those mentors, you experience or view people who do something you definitely would never want to do. You have bosses that suck and you realize, okay, that's the type of person I never want to be to someone else. All of those inputs that you gather throughout your life and your career then make it easier for you to see in the next stage of life. All right, I've got choices. Let me sit with myself for a second, more than a second, and think like, what's actually important to me? How am I going to be proud to show up to people who depend on me, to people that I lead in the workplace, to people who are looking at me as a role model? I guarantee, even if you're sitting here like listening to this thinking like, no one thinks of me as a role model, I guarantee at least one or two people do. And that's a responsibility. That's an amazing thing to have. But the self-awareness piece comes in when you take that moment and think, all right, I've lived some life. Maybe I don't agree with everything that I was told about what this life was going to be. Why don't I agree with that? And then how can I move differently based on what I do now believe, my own opinions?
I feel like a common theme, one in this episode, but also what I've noticed too is when we were young, it was always like find the things that you like to do or like hone in on your interests or your hobbies or like what you want to make a career out of. But I feel like from my experience, I've noticed we got to do it the other way of like figuring out what I don't like to do and then getting rid of that. And then it's like carving out of clay, chiseling away at all the things that you don't like to then come to like the piece of art, this pièce de résistance, right? Yes. Of like what you actually love to do. And that is like the end goal. And you somehow find that through all of the years of experience and trying new things.
Yeah. I think a perfect example of this, and it's just recency bias because I was just reading a magazine article about her, but Martha Stewart. First of all, did you know that Martha Stewart is 83? I had no idea. Looking amazing.
I knew she was like obviously a little bit older now, but like I don't identify her as an 83-year-old.
Exactly. It's like, wow, Martha.
She looks great.
Drop the skincare routine. What I didn't know is that she started working in the stock market right out of college, got married when she was 24, had a child with her ex-husband, and didn't start working on like home economics projects or anything until her late 30s, early 40s. And she was never published anywhere until her 40s. But how could she have known that those were her passions, her hobbies that could be turned into an empire if she hadn't tried? How would she know that, okay, I had my fun in the stock market and I think she did enjoy it a little bit, but like, okay, this isn't for me anymore. Had she not, one, tried, and two, like taken the time to reflect on, is this really working for me anymore? And not being afraid of the answer if the answer is no.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I've seen articles about women, specifically women who classified as a late bloomer, but like they just took their time to figure out other things or pursue other interests, and that's how they came to like things that they're now really well known for example, like Martha Stewart with like home economics, you know, all these powerhouse women that we think of, like they took time to really identify what they wanted to do, and once they identified that, of course, it like paid off, but it took some time and we don't necessarily always see that.
Right, exactly.
I really love like day in the lives, but I would love to know about like where you're at currently with like your professional career. Like what does a day in the life look like for Janel? What matters most to you in your weekly work week? Share with us just like where we could find you during the week.
This is such a good question. question because it's so hard for me to answer. But also, I think that, like, funnily enough, that's kind of a sign of success for me right now, that it is hard. I can't give a standard answer to that question, and that's exciting to me. So that in and of itself is kind of cool. But if we were to take maybe just like a random sample, let's say that like the majority of my time right now is actually spent with current consulting clients. So I now offer the same kind of frameworks on career clarity, job readiness, and job placement that I put in Pivot with Purpose. I offer that to professional organizations who want to help their members with their career development as a benefit for their like membership and being part of that organization or that business school, university, whatever. So it's customizing my knowledge that I've already laid out, customizing it to that client. And the other biggest chunk of time is pitching myself and introducing myself and like raising my hand for opportunity. So I actually spend so much time thinking like, who would I love to partner with? Who needs to know that I exist? And that sounds like very, it's not humble at all, but you know what?
You gotta be like that. I love it though.
That's the name of a book that I really like by a gal that I admire, Stephanie Sword Williams, Fuck Being Humble. But like I spend a lot of time just telling people that I exist and giving them ideas on how we might collaborate together based on like what's on my vision board. You know what? And there's a lot of following up. There's a lot of ghosting. There's a lot of polite persistence, reminding people like, hey, you said you might be interested in this. Here's something that could make it easier. So pitching, it takes a lot of time. I do work with one-on-one folks in a variety of different like career coaching capacities. And I've let myself expand beyond just job search coaching. So I never really thought that I could be the type of person who would be like, I'll help you be an entrepreneur with your business. And I don't think I would ever call myself a business coach just because like it carries a lot of like ickiness at this point. But if someone is interested in an entrepreneurial career, coach them and offer them guidance on how to make that a reality for them and their specific wants, needs, values, etc. If that ends up in their own business, great, but that wasn't how we started. And then what I am focusing on at this season of life as well is finishing my book proposal. So that's a lot of time too. And what I will say about the beauty of how my time is now allotted is something that I looked into in entrepreneurship chapter 2, what I consider like where I am now after this year's layoff, that like I recommitted to being an entrepreneur, but I recommitted to a career model and a business model that works for me instead of just following the like, oh, this is how you do it, A, B, and C, copy, paste. I got it something a little woo-woo, a little metaphysical, and it's called human design. And so it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and I take everything with a grain of salt, but there are certain designs of people's energy that is how they work best. And when I realized that my human design energy type was one that requires or does their best work when they are like rested and when they take time to pause and when they take time to unplug and think like, hang on, it's not about how much I do in a day. It's about the efficacy and the targetedness of what I do each day. When I gave myself the permission to work that way, it's been so liberating and I feel better. I've managed to avoid burnout this far just because like I permission to be like, no one is coming to look at the end of the day at your timesheet. Like you don't work for a reason. You don't have billable hours in the same way that you did in other ways. Like, yes, maybe for some of these clients, it works that way, but like no one's coming at the end of the day to be like, okay, Janelle, what did your workday look like today? Unless you're on a podcast, you know, but like no one cares. And so if I know that I was extremely effective today, but that meant like 5 hours of really effective work instead of 9, who the hell cares? Amazing.
Exactly.
There's a quote from The Office that I actually think about a lot. And it's like from the later seasons when it started to go downhill and Michael Scott left and all that. But Kathy Bates comes in as Joe, like the owner or the CEO of like Sabre, who acquires Dunder Mifflin. And she comes in and Michael is really afraid to ask to like let the team leave early for the day. And like at St. Patrick's Day, we really want to leave, blah, blah, blah. She says something that I still think about. She's like, you know what? As long as you can go home, hang your hat and put your name on this day, that's up to you. But that's also like up to anyone's definition. And so sometimes I find myself like, can I put my name on this day? Yeah, I can. Okay. I'm going to close my laptop and go have dinner with my friend. I'm going to close my laptop and like go call my grandparent to check in and just chill. You know what I mean? And that feels really successful to me.
That's beautiful. I love that a lot. And I literally thought about the question and you answered it immediately as I thought about it, because we talked about at the beginning, you're working through setting boundaries and being more mindful of your boundaries. And I think you talking about time management and just like, if I can hang up my hat and put my name on a 5-hour day, or like, let's say a 2-hour day, like that's really beautiful. I struggle with this too. I work a typical 9 to 5 right now, but there are some times when maybe I've done like a 5-hour day and it's like, this is all I can give today. I really can't squeeze one other brain cell out to do another 2 hours, right? And I'm really trying to just like give myself grace of like, okay, I'll make up the other 2 hours another day this week, you know?
Exactly.
That's the nature of my job. But like, I really love the idea of just giving yourself grace and being mindful of that.
I saw an illustration or a graphic on Instagram a couple of weeks ago that was making its rounds, and it said, if all you had to give today was 40% and you gave 40%, you gave 100%.
Yeah. That's so true. My brain can be like super, super hard on myself. And sometimes I need those to like give me a little bit of a check, a reality check of like, hello, you're doing a really great job, even though your brain's telling you you're not.
Totally.
In our initial time together, you made a really great remark that stuck with me, that we all work so hard to go to school, start our careers, land our dream job, you know, grow up, finally just become an adult, all to realize that nobody really knows what they're doing, hence this podcast. We're all just as lost as the next. And you said this specifically, that it's really a beautiful moment rather than like a crisis. Because when we say, oh my God, I have no idea, we are in crisis mode and we're like, how did I get here? Kind of what we were talking about before. But can you elaborate on this thought of why it's such a beautiful moment rather than a crisis?
It's such an opportunity. It's really an opportunity if you recognize it as such, and if you take the opportunity to know yourself better and to cultivate that self-awareness that we've been talking about throughout this conversation. And so the crisis moment can be like oh shit, I give up, or I'm doomed, I just have to take whatever I can get. Or it could be an opportunity to think differently, to know yourself better, and then to like apply that self-knowing, that self-awareness and knowledge into something that feels better for you. So I think it's really just about perspective.
I would say to anyone that's listening and that is in that moment, and I'm sure if you've listened to this podcast, then you have experienced that, but to like flip the perspective of it is an opportunity, and it's more so about like where you can go next, or like a catch-22 of you just doing a pulse check on how you're feeling. And if you're feeling like you don't really know what you're doing, then it's time to like pivot or shake things up. So I do appreciate that, Janelle. So before we wrap up, I would love it if you could tell listeners where they can find you. So promote all the different aspects that you're on, digitally or in person. I would love for people to connect with you.
Pivot with Purpose is available for you to dive into right now. You can share the link in the show notes or whatnot, or it's in every bio I have on social media. And you can find me literally everywhere: TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, at Janel Abrahami, my first and last name. And I share a lot of content on social and in my newsletter, Going Places. The links will be here. I share a lot of content on ambition, redefining our ambition or reframing it based on where we are in life, career, yes, like career development, and figuring out where you want to go and then how to get there.
Well, thank you so much, Janelle. That was a stellar podcast episode. There were so many like great takeaways in there and like little nuggets of wisdom. So selfishly, I thought it was really incredible and really useful to my own personal life, but I know listeners will feel the same. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure. I really appreciate it.